I know you want to talk to all your friends. I know you're having a good time. But we have somebody very special with us, and we want to give him time to talk to us so you have time to ask some questions, which he's happy to do, but time moves on, and the club has happily cleared all of the plates. They're very good and quiet about bringing in the cookies and the fruit and the coffee. So we're going to get started, and we are truly, truly honored to have. Oh, and before I start, because Peter is going to be showing some video on that screen. So some of those of you who are over on that side of the room, grab your coffees and your cookies and just kind of slide your seat around so that you can be wherever you want to be when he starts the videos. You will hear them, I can guarantee. And maybe you've seen some of the performances, but you've got some good things coming. We are honored to have Peter Gelb, who is, of course, general manager of the Metropolitan Opera, with us today. He really needs no introduction here, since half of you worked for his father, Arthur Gelb, at one time or another, and more than half of you are already opera fans. But I'd just like to mention a few facts you may have missed. What an education. Taken around town by his father, who knew everyone and every place, especially of cultural importance. While in high school, he ushered at the Metropolitan Opera. At 17, he became an office boy to Saul Hurok. At 26, at the end of the Cultural Revolution, he managed the Boston Symphony's tour to China, age 26. Think of your children and grandchildren. Are they ready for this? At 27, he became Vladimir Horowitz's manager, reviving his performing career and managing his historic return to what was then the Soviet Union, to Russia. What a start. And like Bill Gates and some of the other techno-wizard geniuses that we know today, he dropped out of an Ivy League college because there were better things here in New York. And of course, Yale proudly now calls him an alumnus and gives him awards. What do you say to that? They know a good thing. But we have a man who went on from there to found Columbia Artists Management's Video, to be president of Sony Classical Records, and he's now coming up on his 10th anniversary as general manager of the Metropolitan Opera, where he is perhaps best known for taking opera beyond the expensive confines of the opera house and bringing it to the world. HD Live, I have to tell you, if you've not been there, because I've been to both the Opera House in really nice seats, and to HD Live, it's one of the best tickets in town. It's one of the best tickets anywhere. I am very happy to present to you Peter Gelb.
Thank you very much for that impressive introduction. It's good to remember what I actually have done in my life. I'm honored to have been invited to speak to you today, particularly because my father was a colleague and friend to members of this august organization, and I remember how proud he was to receive the Peter Keese Award in 2004. My father was very excited for me when I was appointed to my position as general manager of the Met that same year, although he worried on my behalf about how I would deal with the various forces and factions at the world's largest performing arts company. As my father frequently observed when he was an editor at the Times, he was attacked equally by the right and the left, which was an indication, he liked to say, of the objectivity that was always his goal as an honest journalist. Although in my job, objectivity is not necessarily a deciding factor, I've certainly had my fair share of attacks from a wide variety of quarters. So by my father's criteria, I must be doing something right. Although this season has been relatively calm so far, last season had its fair share of crises. In times of crisis, I have a 24/7 clause in my contract that kicks in, since I always have to be on call. One of our board members is fond of quoting an aphorism which he attributes to Winston Churchill, that the only endeavor more complicated than grand opera is war. In fact, Churchill never said that. I've never certainly been to war, but having led the Met for the past 9.5 seasons as its general manager, I can imagine what it feels like to be a battle-worn veteran. Although I don't think I'm suffering from post-operatic stress syndrome just yet. But in terms of aging and wear and tear, I think every year as head of the Met should probably be calculated in dog years. As I'm sure you're aware, we negotiated new contracts with 15 of our 16 unions in 2014. I spent many months trying to convince our unions that the cost structure of the Met had to be reduced in order to create a more sustainable business model to help ensure our future. The unions, in turn, tried to convince the Met board and the public that the future shouldn't include me as its general manager. But with the work stoppage looming, the unions finally agreed to their first wage cut in the 131-year history of the Met. The season started on schedule, and between union and administrative pay cuts and other reductions that were mutually agreed upon, we were saving $90 million over 4 years. Then, as last season began, ultra-conservative Jewish groups demonstrated outside of the Met, a few even threatening me with death, in an attempt to stop us from producing The Death of Klinghoffer, John Adams' masterful opera about a terrorist hijacking in the 80s, which the demonstrators considered to be anti-Semitic and pro-terrorist. Undaunted, the opera went on and enjoyed a significant success. Seeing it, audiences realized that it was not anti-Semitic, or the glorification of terrorism that it was accused of being. Although threatened, I was not assassinated, and thankfully for me, Jews can't be excommunicated. A few months later, an anti-Ukrainian separatist jumped on the Met stage to protest against Valery Gergiev and Anna Netrebko, who were performing in Tchaikovsky's Iolanta, while outside the Opera House, other protesters held up a poster depicting me as a monkey on a leash held by Putin. On top of all that, last February was the coldest winter in New York since 1934, which certainly didn't help us at the box office and left us wondering where was global warming when you needed it. As my early mentor, the late producer Saul Hurok once said, "If the people don't want to come, you can't stop them." That is why my main preoccupation at the Met is to ensure that this aging art form stays afloat through new initiatives that will stimulate the public to keep attending and the donors to keep giving. For grand opera, the challenges of staying closely connected with the public are greater than for some other art forms. Operas are long and in foreign languages and mostly rooted in the past, with music from the 18th, 19th, and early 20th century providing the basis for the core repertoire. Where would any major opera company be without its staple of Wagner and Mozart, Strauss, Puccini, Verdi, and Rossini? So with the basic repertoire largely set, although we are certainly attempting to make inroads with new works, it makes it even harder for an established older audience to accept change. Yet change is essential in order to achieve artistic renewal. Without change in the form of new productions, any performing art form would fossilize and not be able to attract new audiences. On the other hand, the music critics have become jaded by the repeating repertoire and seem to rarely be satisfied with either new productions or revivals of old productions. Although we did just score a critical and public hit with our first presentation of Bizet's The Pearl Fishers at the Met in 100 years. Well, I hire directors of all stripes, from Broadway and the West End, from luminaries like Bartlett Sher, Nick Heitner, and Richard Eyre, to visionaries like Robert Lepage, who directed our controversial Ring cycle. There is one aspect that all these directors share in common. They are first and foremost excellent storytellers who are committed to presenting clear narratives to their audiences. They understand that there is an audience out there with whom they must connect in order to achieve popular success. The very first production of my tenure at the Met was the late Academy Award-winning filmmaker Anthony Minghella's stunning presentation of Madame Butterfly, which at the beginning of my term, even most of the critics liked. But I still remember Anthony's incredulousness at his first press conference to announce that he would be directing Butterfly, his very first opera, and sadly, since he died, his last. One of the critics asked him, "What are you going to do to Butterfly?" Surprised, Anthony said, "What do you mean, what am I going to do to Butterfly?" "Nothing. I'm going to tell the story of Butterfly." And that is what he did, touchingly and poetically. And that's what good directors do, in spite of goading from the critics. As Eugene O'Neill once said of his critics, "God bless every bone in their heads." The more familiar the storyline, like, for example, Wagner's Ring Cycle, the more the critics seem to want to discourage a lucid stage direction. Dramatically moving the yardsticks forward in terms of new theatrical technology, Lepage's Ring Cycle at the Met attempted to bring clarity to the very complicated plot of conniving dwarves, guilt-ridden gods, jealous giants, and heroic humans. In fact, Lepage's goal was to make this great mythological epic intelligible and stimulating, both for the experienced ring aficionados as well as for the first-time audience members. One of the greatest compliments I heard about Lepage's Ring Cycle was that what is usually the slowest playing of the four operas, Siegfried, sped by for our audience members who were completely absorbed by the action. The Met's Ring, with the help of Lepage's wondrous prototype scenic machine, even though occasionally a little noisy, told the ring as Wagner had written it. Gods are godlike and heroes are heroic. The process of producing the new ring at the Met was one of the most challenging projects of my career, and it was not without its share of mishaps. Knowing it was not going to be easy and that it represented a milestone in Met production history, I asked my filmmaker friend Susan Frumke to document the entire 5-year production process. The result was a film called Wagner's Dream, and I'm now going to show you a trailer for that film to give you an idea of what it was like. If you could play Wagner's Dream.
Nothing defines an opera house more than new productions. Opera has to be constantly renewing itself.
The Metropolitan Opera kicks off its new season with the lavish production of Wagner's 4-part Ring Cycle. It's the most ambitious production the Met has ever mounted.
This is as big as it gets for an opera company.
No new production is more significant.
The story of the ring is the creation and the destruction of the world. 16 hours of opera. This is an intense challenge for any director.
Robert Lepage, one of theater's great visionaries.
We use state-of-the-art tools to present a really fresh, new, avant-garde, crazy ring.
I went to Iceland, digging into the Icelandic roots, tectonic sets, breaking apart and separating suits, the Scandinavian myths.
I love Vogner. I'm afraid of what they're going to do with it, though.
Parts of it have always been unstageable, swimming underwater, walking over rainbow bridges, riding on winged horses.
Nobody has gotten it perfectly right.
That's what we're trying to do.
Deborah Voigt, you'll be singing Brunhilde for the very first time.
There are only 1 or 2 or 3 Brunhildes who can command the stage at the Met.
There are so many challenging vocal passages. It can be defining in her career.
It was so daunting for such a time that I thought, are you out of your mind? It's a very emotional journey, this one.
Have you seen those sets?
I'm a little bit nervous about standing on it.
Emergency stop.
You were never in danger. Everything was locked.
I don't want to lose my feet or whatever.
This is when the real pros come out.
I'm so scared. I'm sorry.
Everything okay?
So far, so good.
I always compare it to, being kind of a Christopher Columbus. You have to convince a whole crew that you're not going to fall off the edge of the earth, that you are going to discover something. You know it's there and you'll get there.
This is what opera is like.
We want more.
The challenge of sustaining the aging art form of opera, to keep it young and vital, requires nonstop attention. The search committee of the Met's board of directors wasn't joking when they told me in my interview in the fall of 2004 that one of my primary qualifications was that I lived only 4 blocks from Lincoln Center. After a 1.5-year interim role as general manager-elect, I officially became the Met's 16th general manager on August 1, 2006. Several months earlier, I had held a press conference on the Met stage in which I announced my plans to reinvigorate the company. To reassure our core audience, I quoted Rudolph Bing, the legendary 10th general manager, who had said in his inaugural 1950 press conference, "I will attempt to run this house on the principle of quality only." But I also read this quote from him: "What may be right now might have been quite wrong before, and what was right so far may be wrong in the future." I was beginning the balancing act of connecting the Met to a broader audience while trying not to threaten our loyal older audience, who not only bought tickets, but also provided the bulk of our contributions. Not unlike a political platform for change, I announced the Met's new strategic plans, which included a dramatic increase in the number of new productions each season, from 3 to 7, now it's 6, with a new roster of the world's greatest theater directors at the helm. An even greater emphasis on securing more performances per season from the best singers and guest conductors, a strong commitment to producing and presenting contemporary work, including commissions and expanding the Met's repertoire with previously neglected masterpieces, a new tie to the world of contemporary visual arts, and a new initiative in media with global digital distribution of our live content to opera lovers around the world. And finally, I announced an effort to tear down the Met's elitist image through a wide variety of public programs that would reopen our institution to the world. In order to get things moving, our very first opening night in September 2006 was transmitted live and free to an audience in Times Square. I don't know if any of you have seen that, but Times Square was closed to traffic for the occasion, and by presenting ourselves in Times Square, we dramatically demonstrated our plan to engage the public. Ever since then, our opening night of the season has been shared with an audience of thousands in Times Square, and here is some footage of the opening night of Elisir d'Amore with soprano Anna Netrebko, one of opera's biggest stars from a few seasons ago. If we could play that video, please.
Good evening. I'm Deborah Voigt, and I'm thrilled to once again be your host for opening night at the Metropolitan Opera with Donizetti's Elisir d'Amore. While a glittering audience enjoys tonight's performance inside the Met, welcome to all of you out here on the plaza at Lincoln Center, and to everyone watching from Times Square, where tonight's performance is being seen on more screens than ever before. What does it mean for the cultural life of the city to make the Met's opening night so accessible?
I think it means that great art belongs everywhere in a great city, not only here for diehard opera fans, but really in the heart of New York. You both look kind of tired. Take a deep breath, it's okay.
You know, the stage is huge.
Yes.
And we have to run and do lots of movements.
Yes.
So that's why there is a...
I'm dancing and laughing and, by the way, singing.
And we got that too.
Do I dare mention the aria coming up in the next act?
Which one?
Una furtiva lagrima, one of the most gorgeous and famous
we cut it in this
pieces
production,
ever.
didn't know?
No.
opened dress rehearsals, we opened our art gallery, and we started around-the-clock Met Channel on Sirius satellite radio, among other brand-new audience-building initiatives. All these projects were embraced by the public and continue today. The most discussed new activity of the Met has been Live in HD, our series of live performance transmissions into movie theaters and performing arts centers around the world. This venture was inspired by the Met's live radio broadcasts, which have been taking place for 85 years this season. Shortly after I was appointed to the Met, the late Beverly Sills showed me a photograph taken in the 1950s of a community in a Midwestern town gathered around a small radio in a gymnasium, listening raptly to one of the Met Saturday matinee radio broadcasts. When the Met began its live broadcast in 1931, it was the first company in the performing arts to utilize the media to reach a national audience. Since then, these Saturday matinee radio broadcasts have provided cultural enrichment for several generations of Americans and for decades have been heard all over the world. And that is what inspired the idea of attempting something new with our live transmissions in high definition into movie theaters. The concept was simple. It was to strengthen the bond between the Met and its audience by providing as much live content as possible. While it was somewhat challenging to negotiate the rights with our 16 unions and to persuade the performers that this would be a path to stimulating interest in opera, we now know that it was well worth the effort. Just as sports teams excite their fans with a constant flow of coverage of their games over the internet, on the radio and onto television, and large screens and sports bars, we are now following a similar but slightly different course. And it works because opera fans are equally passionate about opera as sports fans are about sports. Now hundreds of thousands of opera fans are united 10 times each season as we transmit our selected 1 p.m. matinee performances into movie theaters and performing arts centers from San Francisco, live, to as far east as Jerusalem and Cairo, spanning 11 different live time zones. Our northernmost outlet is Tromsø, Norway, which is inside the Arctic Circle, and our southernmost venue is in southern Argentina. Further east in Asia, Australia, and New Zealand, where the time difference is too great, the transmissions are shown on a time-delayed basis. This season, our transmissions are being seen in more than 2,000 theaters in 70 countries, and in every continent except Antarctica. To serve our global audience, we utilize 6 different satellites that carry signals encoded with subtitles in 8 different languages. More than 19 million people have seen the Met in movie theaters so far since we began this initiative 10 seasons ago. Who would have thought that millions of people would be enjoying grand opera and a hot dog for less money than it costs to attend a baseball game? We have won new fans while also satisfying old ones. Now, when audiences arrive from out of town, most of them have already been introduced to the Met through our HD programs. They enter our theater already knowing us from afar. The movie theater audiences revel in the backstage camera work, where we offer a veritable live opera reality show of stagehands executing high energy and risky scene changes, and divas opening their dressing room doors to our Steadicams during the intermissions. The occasional mishap backstage heightens the excitement for the viewers, since they all know it's live, like the time when soprano Deborah Voigt, hosting a transmission of Salome, couldn't persuade soprano Carita Matula to come out of her dressing room for an interview, as scheduled, and for what seemed like an eternity was left talking to a closed door. With our transmissions, the backstage of the Met becomes a high-definition fishbowl, much to the enjoyment of our audiences in the movie theaters. The HD programs have also had a profound impact on our casting and have helped reinforce good acting on our stage, since singers know that even when they're not singing, they might be seen in a close-up reaction shot. This makes them stay in character throughout, which is a benefit to the audience in the opera house as well. Long gone are the days when the Met used to keep food stashes hidden in corners of the stage, available for Luciano Pavarotti, who would snack between arias. The prospect of singing to a live worldwide audience also inspires our singers to greater vocal achievements. When the stakes are highest, like for the greatest athletes who break records at the Olympics, our stars inevitably sing their best on a Saturday matinee that's being transmitted live in HD. And for my final video clip, I want to show you an example of two great singers being inspired by the roles they are playing at the Met, but while knowing that an audience of hundreds of thousands are watching. This is a live transmission of a segment of Carmen, starring Elena Garancia and Roberto Alagna in the final moments of Carmen.
Je l'aurais perdu pour que toi, que tu t'en ailles, femme, entre ses bras, rire de moi. Tu n'iras pas, Carmen, c'est moi que tu suivras. Non, chérie, je suis là de te menacer. Laisse-moi passer. Pour la dernière fois, démarre. Veux-tu le suivre? Non, non. Cette barre, oh, il faut. Tu me l'avais donné. Tiens. Eh bien, donnez.
In order to run the Met, I have to wear many hats: artistic and business leader, fundraiser, and sometimes amateur medical director for the opera stars. During the season, I often feel like a doctor who is always on call. In fact, after 9 1/2 seasons as general manager dealing with the fragile state of tenors and sopranos, I've come to realize that there only are 3 stages of health for singers. They are always catching a cold, recovering from a cold, or suffering from a cold. Recently, one famous and talented tenor that I tried coaxing from his dressing room back onto the stage, and who had no fever, and not even a case of the sniffles, told me that he didn't think he could go on because he felt cold inside. That's why tenor jokes exist. One of which is, how do you put a sparkle in a tenor's eyes? Shine a flashlight in his ear. Long before I came to the Met, I thought that I was well trained in dealing with the challenging demands of artists with complicated personalities. I managed Vladimir Horowitz, who was perhaps the greatest pianist of all time, but who only agreed to return to Moscow to perform his historic 1985 televised concert during the Cold War after I had promised, with the assistance of the American and British ambassadors and the US Secretary of State, to airlift into Moscow his nightly dinner of fresh Dover sole, the only food he would eat for dinner at the time, and guaranteed, with the direct intervention of President Reagan, that his Steinway would be kept under 24-hour guard by the US Marine Corps. Long before spoiled pop superstars would be making their outlandish contractual demands, like specifying what color the M&Ms had to be in their dressing rooms, Horowitz had mastered the art of the outrageous contract writer. Amongst other requirements, Horowitz demanded that the temperature of the stage had to be exactly 72 degrees, and that there had to be 12 wooden hangers in his dressing room closet. If any of these contractual requirements were not met, he had the right to immediately cancel. Along the way, I also picked up practical advice from Horowitz. Horowitz taught me the value of acoustics. He once said to me, If the check is good, the acoustics are good. He also taught me how to read a menu in an expensive restaurant, from right to left, like Hebrew, he explains. Towards the end of his life, after I'd worked for him for 12 years, he said to me, "I've known you so long, you are like a member of our family. From now on, instead of calling me Mr. Horowitz, I would like you to call me Maestro." Dealing with temperamental artists like Horowitz helped prepare me for the monumental task of managing the world's largest opera company, a job that I think sometimes requires the fortitude of a lion tamer and the dexterity of a tightrope walker. Legend has it that Rudolph Bing, the illustrious former general manager of the Met, would relax from the tension of dealing with opera stars by pretending to smack them on his desk with a fly swatter. My immediate predecessor as general manager, Joseph Volpe, was famous for threatening a difficult diva that her wig was going on the stage with or without her. Sometimes I fantasize about a utopian opera house where singers are always well behaved and show up on time for rehearsals. Of course, the uncertainties of our art form are part of what makes opera so exciting for its fans and for those of us who work at the Met as well. From my first day on the job, it has been my mission to honor the Met's past while nudging it forward. Of course, I realize that my work is far from complete. I know that change isn't always easy or comfortable, and we have no interest in implementing change just to be different. For example, although I would like to find replacements for the two remaining Franco Zeffirelli productions at the Met, La Bohème and Turandot, these lavish stage spectacles are still hard to top, and I'm not yet prepared to commit potential suicide with our audience by replacing them. I had a hard lesson in 2009 when we replaced Zeffirelli's beloved and grandiose production of Tosca with a new, grittier conception directed by the esteemed French director Luc Bondy, who up until his untimely death this past fall had run the Odeon, the leading theater in Paris. Our new Tosca in 2009 certainly divided the public, although Bondy was convinced that the boos he heard on stage were actually audience members shouting "woo." Since he said he had never been booed before, I didn't have the heart to disagree with him. However, we did disengage ourselves from his new production of Rigoletto when I saw it in Vienna and found it to be visually not so interesting. Instead, our new Rigoletto, which opened several seasons ago, directed by Tony winner Michael Mayer, was a visual feast of light sculptures representing a neon fantasy of Las Vegas in 1960. It was stunning, and it made narrative sense, so Met audiences, both old and new, liked it. We need to continue to take calculated creative risks in order to provide the stimulation that I believe our art form requires to keep it refreshed. In 1931, while the United States was still in the throes of the Depression, the Met was making use of electronic media with its radio broadcast to help in its fight for financial solvency and a wider public. Today, 85 years later, not much has changed. While communication satellites now circle the globe, the Met is still fighting against financial insolvency and trying to make opera more accessible. Only now, as our art form has grown older, it takes a greater effort than ever, which is why we're utilizing the latest technology and different artistic approaches to try to teach the old form of opera some new tricks. When I was a teenager, thanks to my father, I was given a job as a part-time usher in the family circle standing room, the nosebleed section at the very top of the Met's auditorium, where I had my first exposure to some of the Met's more rabid fans, who would often fight with each other over their favorite singers. My job was to break up the fights, or to call in as reinforcements the off-duty firemen who moonlighted as security officers at the Met. In between breaking up fights, from my vantage point at the very top of the Met, some 150 feet from the stage, I listened to the glorious voices of the greatest singers of 1970, a golden era for operatic voices. The legendary Leontine Price, perhaps the greatest Aida of all time, Renata Tebaldi, Italy's #1 diva and Maria Callas's main rival, and Franco Corelli, the forerunner to Pavarotti as the world's greatest tenor, but whose severe episodes of stage fright tragically foreshortened his career. All this had a magical effect on my teenage soul from the impressive gold proscenium that framed the stage, the sea of plush red velvet seats. The Met seemed to represent everything theatrical and glamorous about New York. It was as if all of the performing arts had been rolled into one gold leaf operatic palace, and that is when I fell in love with the Met. Of course, back then, I had no idea that some 36 years later, I would be asked to run this glorious and wacky institution, which, because of some of the antics of our performers, sometimes feels more like an asylum than an opera house. With its $300 million annual operating budget and 3,200 employees, the Met is a multi-headed organism that requires constant attention. Even though we've seen our global audience grow, we have suffered some declines in recent seasons at our box office as the older audience transitions to a younger one. I know that it is the responsibility of the Met to win new audiences for opera, since no matter how venerable our 131-year-old opera company is, there is no free pass into the remainder of the 21st century. We are studying new models for our performance schedule, thinking about creating more programs in which to bring opera into the community, planning to increase our educational efforts in New York and across the nation, and adding new digital platforms for our performance contents. About 25 years ago, I made a documentary film about the cellist and political activist Mstislav Rostropovich's return from exile to Russia at the end of the Cold War. During one scene in the film, Rostropovich repeated the advice of his mentor, the composer Dmitri Shostakovich, who Stalin had oppressed and censored. Unbowed, Shostakovich had said, "We must be soldiers of music," and that's the credo to which I aspire as well. Thank you very much.
We have, is this working? We have time for just a couple of questions. Is this working? I'm going to take the first one. Peter, you mentioned that about tickets. As I said before, I think that the HD Live is fabulous, one of the best tickets around. I have some friends who are sources in the opera community who say, oh, but it's cannibalizing the tickets in the house. How's it going? What is the story there? Is it, are the tickets down because of people going to the theater?
I think the ticket sales are somewhat down because we're going through this transition. The older audience members were subscribers who, for reasons of attrition, no longer are subscribers. And subscribers typically would buy 10, 20, 30 tickets a season. We actually have more single ticket buyers today in the Opera House than ever before in the history of the Met. But they are new opera goers, and they're buying 4 tickets or 6 tickets. So the number of tickets, even though we have more new buyers, more new ticket goers than ever before, the cumulative effect of their buying does not equal the older subscriptions that we've lost. But this is a nationwide trend. It is not just the Met. The HD shows, 70% of our audience for the HD shows is actually outside the United States. Just last Saturday when we transmitted Pearl Fishers, there were 35,000 people in Germany and Austria watching it live. There were 3,000 people in Vienna watching it live, twice the capacity of the Vienna State Opera. So we are, and the HD programs in the metropolitan area have actually provided a way for older opera lovers to continue being able to attend the opera, people who can't, physically get to the Met any longer. So I don't believe that it has been a source of cannibalization. If it has been, it's a very small source, and the benefits far outweigh any losses.
Peter, what lessons did you draw from the Klinghoffer episode, and would you do anything differently today?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I think today it would be even harder to produce that opera, quite frankly. I think the world becomes increasingly polarized and so full of hate and people politicize everything. I don't know, quite frankly, how I would deal with Klinghoffer today. And the lesson I learned is that it's very difficult to separate art from politics. But it doesn't mean we shouldn't keep trying.
Have you tried the one-stop solution of commissioning Lin-Manuel Miranda?
Well, I certainly admire his work enormously. I went to I saw Hamilton when it was before I moved up to Broadway. Even he's brilliant, but you know he's not an opera composer. He's well, you know, at some point I certainly would. I talked to a lot of different artists about creating new work for the Met, and certainly as a director, he's somebody who I would be very interested in working with, for sure. But I haven't had a conversation with him yet.
You made a controversial decision this year, deciding that the part of Othello would no longer be necessary for the singer to put on dark makeup. Since the play is about amour, it was controversial. Could you talk a little bit about how you reached that decision?
Well, first of all, you know, you have to remember that we were producing Verdi's adaptation of Shakespeare, and in Verdi's adaptation, there was much less reference in the libretto to his skin color, and it's really a fraction of what is in the Shakespeare. You know, we believed that it was a fairly easy decision to make because, you know, in the environment in which we live, in which there is such there was already, we could see there was going to be a lot of discussion about this and controversy, and we really wanted the audiences to be able to focus on the theatrical staging that we were putting on. We did not want anyone to be distracted by what we believe is the most important thing, which is this great opera musically and theatrically. And Bart Scher, the director, felt strongly that really the economic class struggle between the various factions on the stage more than enough was able to address the pressures and differences between Othello and the rich Phoenicians with whom he had to deal with. So it was we made that decision, and I'm glad we did. Because I think, you know, it's what is difficult. I mean, it would be you know, any theatrical presentation of Othello would never take place today without a black actor cast in the leading role in a theatrical presentation. There are no white Othellos playing Othello. The difference in theater, you know, Othello, any production of Othello on Broadway. No, I don't believe he would. I don't believe he'd be cast as it. You know, if you look at recent productions of Othello, they're all black. The difference with opera is that this role of Othello is an impossibly difficult, dramatic Verdi tenor role that literally there are about 2 or 3 singers in the world who can sing. Maybe one singer really who can sing it as well as he could on the Met stage, and he happens to be white and Latvian. So, so we cast him in it. But I think that you know, it is offensive certainly to the black community to have him put on blackface, and I didn't feel it was really necessary to get into that. I feel we were in some ways liberated from that by not having to have him in blackface.
In updating Rigoletto, which I loved, was there ever any thought given to tweaking the plot at the end so that Gilda is not such a masochistic idiot?
Well, is there any, in updating our production of Rigoletto, was there any way of changing the plot or changing the character of Gilda so she's not so masochistic? But that is the plot. So, I mean, you know, what we did do was, you know, the reason why we were able to do that update is because the storyline worked in this Las Vegas Rat Pack misogynist setting in a way from start to finish. I mean, the difficulty and the challenge for updating operas and putting them in more modern context, and many opera directors do this, many theater directors do this with Shakespeare, but it only works, as far as I'm concerned, is if it works from the beginning to the end. If you find one moment that seems like it works in a modern setting, but the rest of it doesn't hold up, there's no point in doing it, in my opinion. So we did it with Rigoletto because Michael Mayer, the director, really figured it out and created something that was very exciting scenically, in that the Christy Jones's sets actually pulsed. The neon lighting of Las Vegas actually climax in the final storm scene when Gilda sacrifices herself. The set, the neon of the set was actually pulsing with the storm music of Verdi in a way that it's very rare that you get this kind of wonderful unity of scenery and lighting and music that works together. It made it much more powerful, I think, for the audience. Yes, sir.
You spoke about this sort of mishigas of some of the stars. In your experience, is this psychosis unique to opera singers more than, say, other forms of show business?
Well, I think, opera singers have a very difficult life as performers because they are, unlike other singers, who can, to be a great pop star, you don't have to be a great singer. It helps. But you can be a pop star and rely upon electronic mixes and all kinds of other things. To be an opera star, if you don't have a great voice, because there's no amplification, you get on the stage of the largest opera house in the world, the Met, the pressure and stress that is on these singers to go out there and hit their high notes is extraordinary. And there's no other performing, and that's why opera fans get so excited by that, because and then why they come back for multiple performances of the same opera, because they want to see their favorite stars, see if they can hit these heroic highs and with the notes they have to hit. But that comes with that comes an enormous amount of stress. And that's why they're constantly worried. Their instrument is their vocal cords, so they're constantly worrying about, if they're going to get sick and how will that affect the way they sing. And they spend hours talking about it. Some singers actually think they sing better when they're beginning to get sick because their voices resonate more. But once their cold hits their vocal cords, that's it. So, but I'm sympathetic to how difficult it is for them.
Could you say a few more? This thing is alive. Could you say a few more words about the possibility of Sunday matinees?
Well, this is something which I feel is essential because we look at the changing buying patterns of audiences and we know that Broadway does so well with Sunday matinees. It's a no-brainer that we should have Sunday matinees at the Met. The only difficulty is we have unions who have in their contracts a provision that says they don't have to sing or perform on Sundays. And so I have to persuade them, or at least wait till the next negotiation to negotiate it. So sometime, as I said in the Times piece that ran recently, I believe it's inevitable, but it's going to take some time to win that over. Yes.
Just curious, totally hypothetical question. How would the history of the Met have been different if you had remained at 7th Avenue and 40th Street, which was torn down, I think, in 1967?
Well, if it was torn down, we wouldn't be here.
Truth, I mean, economically not viable.
I don't know enough about the reasons for why the Met. Honestly, I don't know the history of the Met well enough to explain the answer to that. I mean, the difficulty, the Met's finances are difficult because of a structural imbalance between the costs and the revenues. And that, I think, would have been, it's not just in the case of the Met, it's in the case of any opera company, any large opera company, which has, we have all these unionized employees who over many decades have established huge wages. I'm not saying that they're wonderful artists and they work very hard, but the collective wages which they earn represent about 2/3 of the total Met costs, and it is not possible through ticket sales alone to possibly meet those costs. So some fundraising has to augment. In the case of the Met, fundraising represents about half of our operating costs on an annual basis. So the Met raises more money than any performing arts company in the world, but that's because we're larger and our costs are bigger. And so far, over the years, we've managed to make that work. But it's not ideal. Back 130 years ago, opera companies actually were able to break even through ticket sales because the costs were so much lower.
We have time for 2 more. One here.
When are we going to hear a premiere of a brand new opera by a living composer?
Well, we have heard premieres of living composers. Nico Muley's Two Boys was performed several seasons ago. Thomas Addis's The Tempest. We have another Thomas Addis opera and another Nico Muhly opera in the works. We have a commissioning program. Next season, we'll hear the Met premiere of Kaija Saariaho, Finland's leading composer, her best work called L'amour de loin. That's in the fall season. So this season, we don't have a new work, but every season we have, other than this season, we've had and will have either a new production of a major contemporary piece or the first performance of a contemporary piece. I don't necessarily believe that we should give the first performances. I like having, in fact, we often commission works and have them developed elsewhere because we believe that they will get better as they get performed and we have a chance to tweak them and make them improve upon them.
Prices to attract more people and balance out that way?
Well, we have the question is, would we consider lowering ticket prices to attract more audiences? We do that. I mean, we have a huge range of ticket prices. You know, our Rush ticket program, which I mentioned earlier, enables people to get tickets for as little as $20 or $25. And in the actual theater itself, there are tickets as low as $20 or $25 or $30 in the top of the house. But the Rush tickets are actually orchestra seats that are available on a daily basis that are sold. These are tickets that could be sold at normal prices of $150 to $200 that are available for a fraction of that. So we also make the Met, part of the biggest challenge I think for the Met ultimately is educating new audiences. There is no formal education in the public school system for classical music or opera, and there hasn't been for decades. We are providing this function ourselves. We can't reach as many students as the public school system can, but we have thousands of school kids who come to the Met to see the Met for free dress rehearsals. We have programs across the country in more than 30 school districts where teachers bring their students to see the Met in movie theaters after teaching the operas as part of their curriculum. So we're trying to pick up the slack when it comes to education, but it's an uphill battle. The days when Philip Glass recently wrote an autobiographical memoir in which he describes how when he graduated from Juilliard at the age of 17, he was given a federally funded position as the composer in residence for the Pittsburgh public school system in the late 60s. So that was the educational system back then. Today there's nothing like that.
Peter Gelb. Thank you
Thanks
so
much.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Betsy.
One thing before you run out the door, we always have a habit of giving honorary membership for a year in the Silurians to our speakers. You are now a member of the Silurians. You're welcome to come back. Next month, we have Jane Bryant Quinn, who will solve your money problems.
Oh, good.
So she's going to be here third Wednesday of the month, and we will happily have you listen to that. And everybody else, before you leave, remember your name tags. Please put them in the bowl give them to Mary Jane at the door. And thank you and Happy New Year. Have a wonderful winter. We'll see you next month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.